Hey guys, just getting it set up. So I'm gonna pause it for a couple of minutes and then we'll get officially started as we get a few more people. See, we have two people here already. It's one person. Hey. So I'll give just a couple of minutes for a few more people to hopefully show up, and then we'll officially start. If you have questions though, you can start putting them in the chat or in the Q&A. Either way is fine. All right. Hey, guys. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So welcome, guys. We're going to do a Q&A today on period 3 primarily. If you do have questions from period 1 and 2 that are pressing, I'm happy to take those as well. We are going to prioritize period 3 questions. But start them coming. Like I said, even as we were waiting to start, you can start hitting up questions in the bottom. In terms of feedback from last time, or kind of feedback to me and feedback from me, I was saying, don't hesitate to ask questions. If I'm answering one question, you don't need to wait till I'm done to ask another one. The more questions you guys just keep asking in the chat or in the Q&A, however you want to do it, the more I can actually get answered. So who's first? So period 3, we have a lot going on. We have this is the post-classical age. Rome has fallen. Byzantine Empire is trying to do something. Islam has arisen. China is making its way back from a period of disunion. Things are happening in the Americas. What kind of questions did you guys have? Everybody did the initial review from the content review, the videos you guys have to do, right? Let's start hitting up those questions. Should I tell a joke to get things going? I could do a period 3 joke. Can you guys hear me? Because no one's saying anything. Yes. So ask me something. Come on, guys. That's what we're here for. Should I go on live to get more people? Let's try. Go live. I should. Yo, what's up, Instagram? We are now doing our live stream right now on Zoom. Looking for some questions. We're looking for some questions. So we need some new people to come on. Oh, look, I got 2 people on live, you guys. We need to get some questions. Pause due to poor connection. Is it only me, or did your Mac start vibrating? Maybe. So guys, we're doing a period 3 review right now. We're trying to get some good questions about period 3 content for me to answer. Oh, I think we have one Q&A question. Let's see. Can you talk more about pastoralists and Vikings? Yes. Can you guys ask me like a more specific question? So we can talk about the word pastoralist means. Hey guys, thanks for joining on live on Instagram. So the word pastoralist is referring to, we talk about this a lot. Answer live. You would like to answer this question live, Don. So the word pastoralist is referring to nomadic pastoralists, more simply described as herders. So we've talked about these people from period 1, from the beginning of the Neolithic Revolution, right? Part of that was the introduction of agriculture and domestication of animals. So since that happened, we have pastoralists, people who devote their lives to raising domesticated animals, but they don't grow crops. So they are able to be nomadic. They're able to live on the move. And they've played a really important role throughout history. In period 1, we talked about their interaction with agriculturalists. Period 2, they were very instrumental in the Silk Road, which continues into period 3. And we see during period 3 some certain migrations taking place, like the Turkic migrations, which are coming from Central Asia and that Eurasian steppe, and that is a place where you have pastoral nomadic people. We probably most commonly, when we think of the term pastoral nomads, we're thinking of people like the Mongols, like the Huns, like the Turks. But that also applies to people like Arab Bedouins and people, Berber nomads, Tuareg people living in Sahara Desert. So people who are, you think less about grasslands and more about desert areas, right? Because again, the vegetation is sparse. It's not a place that's really conducive to agriculture. And so people are going to be doing, hey, everybody who's joining on Instagram, you guys should come on Zoom so you guys can ask me some questions. That would be amazing. And I'd be happy to answer them for you guys. If you don't know how to get on Zoom, all you need, we have a little melody there. I got a heart, thanks. If you don't know how to get on Zoom, just go to mrkchihistory.com/AP World Review, and the link is there so you can get on. So the pastoralists are, what were we talking about? So people living in deserts as well. And both the pastoral nomads on the steppe and those in the desert regions are going to be really instrumental for trade routes, right? Because even though we have major empires, at different points in the trade route, it's really the middlemen or women who make the trade function and make it possible. And the great thing about nomadic peoples is they're already moving, so they're more capable of engaging in trade. And it's because nomadic people always need to do some trade in order to just be able to get the goods they have. They are already well suited to that kind of stuff. And so along the Silk Road, people living in Central Asia, Sogdiana, Transoxiana, these regions that are today kind of, we would consider Turkestan, the Turkic countries like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and then even further out into what is modern day like southern Siberia and Russia and Mongolia. A lot of those places and cities are going to be really big on the Silk Road. And then when we think about the other two big trade routes from this period, the Trans-Saharan trade route, right, is another one. The other being Indian Ocean trade, but doesn't apply as much to nomadic peoples. But the Trans-Saharan trade route is also going to be really dependent on camels, right? Camel caravans, and the people who already live in the deserts of the Sahara are going to play a major role in the evolution of that trade and making that trade possible. All right, we have an actual specific question. Guys, if you're joining on Instagram once again, you should jump over to the live stream on Zoom so you can get some real questions going there. So what are some examples of technological and cultural transfers during the Crusades? Oh, where do I start? There's so many. So just if we don't remember, right, during the Crusades, we had people from Western Europe traveling to the east, primarily to the Holy Land, but also to Asia Minor, where the Seljuk Turks were invading and trying to conquer the Byzantine Empire. And so there's a series of wars starting in 1095 with Pope Urban's speech at the Council of Clermont, trying to urge people from Western Europe, primarily Western European Catholics, to journey to the Holy Land. See, look at this. Poor connection. See what this says? No, it's gone now. Poor connection. This is why we go with Zoom. Oh, poor connection again. See? Instagram is listening. They're mad that I'm using Zoom, and they don't want me to do that, so they're hurting my connection. But this one has been pretty consistent, so good job, Zoom. So the Crusades, the first crusade makes a successful attempt to conquer the Holy Land, which is modern day Palestine, Israel, as well as Lebanon and Syria, and parts of Turkey. But primarily the area around Jerusalem was most important. After that, there's a series of wars. The Second and Third Crusades, as the people living in the Middle East, the Muslim world, and non-Muslims as well, Christians and Jews living in that region, those states start to get their act together, really, and start retaking that land that was conquered by the Crusaders. additional crusades are launched to try to reclaim that land, just primarily the second and third crusades, and they're not successful ultimately. So by the fourth crusade, as you guys probably remember, okay, let's see if you remember. Do you remember where the fourth crusade mainly attacked? I'll give you a hint. It is not Jerusalem. My ninth graders, if you're watching on Instagram, you guys should know this. Poor connection again. You guys should know this because we only learned about it a couple months ago. So who did the Crusaders attack during the fourth crusade? Come on, guys. We got all these people in here. Somebody give me an answer. Somebody take a guess. Random guess. Something. Tell me that you're out there. Guys, I hear the baby crying upstairs. She's crying that, thank you. Yes, all right, Constantinople. So they attacked the Byzantine Empire, right, which is who they're supposed to be helping. But that, even though that's not ideal, Western Europeans who, since the fall of Rome, have been really cut off from connection with the East, where a lot of that trade and cultural fusion was taking place, because of those crusades, they're connecting with the Byzantine Empire, they're connecting with the Muslim Middle East, and beyond, and the trade routes that are connected to them. And so they're able to make some cultural exchanges. What are some of the things that they picked up specifically? So technologies from not just them. So keep in mind, right, this is a long-term thing, right? It's not like they left the Crusades and immediately had all these new technologies and transfers and things like that. But because that reconnected them with that region, they're able to make those connections over and over again. And even the Mongol conquests, as they expanded into Europe, is going to help start to even more connect Europe again with the Silk Road. So some of the big things they're getting from the East, from the Muslim world, you're getting access to the mathematical, basically the achievements of the Islamic Golden Age. So math is a huge one. The Hindu numerals from period 2 in the Gupta Empire, where they developed this decimal base 10 decimal system, which is so important. It's to our entire concept of mathematics today. The fact that, as I remember, maybe you remember I showed you in class, when we look at the ones column, the tens column, the hundreds column, you couldn't do that with something like Roman numerals, right, or other numeric systems. But Instagram crashed. Bye, guys. Hopefully they'll figure out how to get here. So because you have that system where you can put, ones, tens, hundreds, you can do really quick maths, as an MC would say. You can do, multiplication of numbers in the hundreds and thousands very quickly by just going one column at a time. And you guys know how to do that. You've been doing that in math for years. But that wouldn't be possible without those Hindu numerals, those Indian numerals, which were transmitted to the Muslim world, primarily the Middle East, I should say, during the Islamic Golden Age, which is mostly in the Abbasid period, a little before, a little after. And then from there, that's going to be transferred to all the way to Western Europe. And the Crusades, now, fighting a war is not the most ideal way to have a cultural exchange. You can have friendly relationships with people. I think that's a lot more beneficial. Less people have to die, and it probably is more effective in getting that information. But even when there's war, you still have cultural exchanges. Nubia and Egypt were fighting with each other all the time, but they still traded and they still exchanged culture. So numerals is a huge one. Technologies like the astrolabe really originally were used in Greece, but they were continued in use by the Muslim world, and that would be transferred over. Coffee, maybe not changing the world in the same way as some other inventions, but it's pretty important. Coffee. Some people theorize that the introduction of coffee into Europe helped spur the Enlightenment, because before people drank coffee, they used to drink booze all the time. They'd wake up and start getting drunk in the beginning of the day, and that dulls the senses, of course, and makes you less keen and less able to come up with really good ideas about things. Because the water was bad, so they would usually add alcohol to a lot of what they drank. But if you make coffee, you boil the water to make the coffee, and so you kill the germs. And switching from alcohol to coffee, actually, some people say, people were sitting in these coffee houses just sipping on caffeine, get all these ideas, start being alert, start being awake, and coming up with things. That's from the Muslim world. It's maybe not as famous as some other examples. There are exchanges that even go also banking and a lot of things related to finance and business. Concepts like the partnership, where people would pool their money, right? So we see towards the later part of the Middle Ages, we see a commercial revolution, and we see that the economy in Europe is really starting to make a comeback. That's not exclusively due to influence from the Muslim world, right? There's other things going on within Europe, improvements in agriculture that are going to make, increase the surplus and things like that. But these new methods of economic systems or financial systems, like having the concept of a check, right, where you can put money in a bank, get a piece of paper that represents this much money I owe you from the bank, go to another branch of the bank in a different city, give them that piece of paper, and be given that money back. That comes from the Muslim world. It's going to be used in Europe. Things that make trade and finance and investment in new businesses much easier. Those are going to be things that, help to make this whole thing, help Europe make a comeback. Also inventions even from Asia, things like paper, which paper was introduced into the Muslim world, even though it had been in China for a while. Paper technology came into the Muslim world, helped make the golden age possible. And then paper technology was passed into Europe. And, we talk about the printing press, which also came from China, or the basic idea of it came from China. But you really wouldn't be able to have a printing press if you didn't have cheap paper. And you couldn't do it with parchment, which is so difficult to make, comes from animal skins. The compass and gunpowder, that's not necessarily going to come over immediately from the Crusades, but the Crusades really helped reopen those doors. Access to philosophical knowledge from the ancient Greeks that had been really heavily worked on by Muslim scholars. And because the Greeks were, their religious system was primarily pagan, polytheistic, Christian Europeans are going to have to find ways of adapting that to their own religious beliefs. But since Islam and Christianity are so similar, the work that Muslim scholars did to reconcile Greek philosophy with their monotheism largely applied to Christianity as well. And so they were able to really benefit not only from the Greek scholars of philosophy, but from Muslim scholars who kind of like took those ideas further. Regions where free peasants revolted. Can you give me specific examples, and I can speak to it? I know that was something that was mentioned in the packet, right? I'll look to it as well, but if there's keep hitting up the questions, guys. Let's see. I'm only hearing questions from like one person today. We're all on here. Look at your packets that you guys did. I hope everybody did their packets already, because that's the whole point of doing this. Look at things that were unclear to you, that you have questions about, things that you felt were missed. Have you guys watched the secondary videos? Because they're really good. And clicking on those. Tell me right now, honestly. Maybe can I do a poll? Yeah, let's do a poll. Add a question. Oh gosh, I hope I did this right. Type your question here. Secondary review. Did you watch the secondary optional review video at all this weekend? Yes or no? Save. How do I launch it? Launch poll. There we go. So let's see, guys. How many people did it? We still have 3 people who didn't even vote. Come on, guys. It's not that hard of a question. Yes or no? So far, we have 3 for yes and 1 for no. Whoever didn't vote. All right. Thank you for your honesty. So 4 out of 7 actually watched the secondary videos. Did you find them helpful? I really like the style in those videos. I also posted, I hope you guys saw the videos from so far the past week, as well as last week's Q&A cafe. Oh, I didn't bring any tea this time. I only have water. Yeah, good. I'm glad. I hope you guys helped find them helpful. Let's see. So what were the questions regarding yeah. Okay, good. Hit me with some questions, guys. How did the Tang Dynasty deal with Buddhism? That is a great question. We actually did an essay on this last year. I hope you guys remember it. The Chinese response to Buddhism. So Tang Dynasty started right following the Sui Dynasty. Sui Dynasty was, I want to say 589. I'm not sure if it's the exact date, but it was late 500s, early 600s, the Sui Dynasty. And they were very short-lived because their big claim to fame was the Grand Canal, which connected the north and south of China, which was a big development in terms of a public works project because they were able to connect to, there's 2 major rivers, right? There's the Yangtze River in the south, which is really productive and a lot of rice agriculture. And in the north, you have the Yellow River. But there's no river connecting straight down from the 2 of them. So they built a really nice canal. The problem is a lot of people died building it. It cost a lot of tax money, so they were overthrown. And then you end up with the Tang Dynasty. And the Tang Dynasty, Tang and Song are the 2 big Chinese dynasties from this period, with the exception of the Mongols after them. But also during the Tang period, they're really dealing with this growth of Buddhism because Buddhism was becoming really a major force in China. So in the very beginning of the Tang Dynasty, they're really chill with Buddhism. Some of the early Tang rulers were actually Buddhists themselves, or if they weren't Buddhists, they usually patronized Buddhism. By patronized, we mean they gave like funding. They often, they might build, pay for the building of monasteries or Buddhist shrines, things like that. But as time goes on, and we see this with other religions as well, as that minority religion starts to become more powerful, the government starts to get nervous. So it might have been the last or one of the last Tang emperors went so far actually as to begin persecutions of Buddhists, because you had things like monasteries in China were growing really powerful. You can compare it to a certain extent to monasteries in Europe, Christian Europe during the Middle Ages, where when the government isn't providing a particular service, the monastery might step in. So things like education, and also healthcare, right? At a time when you didn't really have so much in the way of doctors, people were sick, people needed to be cared for. They would often be brought to the monastery and be able to get some help. People appreciate that. That's going to give those monks some social capital, even political power, right? Because you don't have to be a politician to have political power. The popes were religious leaders, but had massive political power, right? Because if people will listen to you, that's political power, right? So the government starts to get more and more nervous about the role of Buddhists and Buddhist leadership in the country. They're getting a lot of. So remember that the primary, kind of default philosophical basis for Chinese government since the Han Dynasty is going to be Confucianism, right? So if they have advisors to the emperor of China, they're mostly going to be Confucian scholars and Confucian experts trained in Confucian ideas. So you start having Buddhists getting involved, getting more influence over the government. They're not going to be too thrilled about that. And if you remember the essay we read, we saw like Confucian scholars really critical of Buddhism in the ears of the emperors, trying to convince them to just cut the Buddhists off. And ultimately, the late Tang Dynasty became very aggressive against Buddhism. After the Tang Dynasty collapses, when you have the Song Dynasty, we see like the development of Neo-Confucianism, where there's actually quite a bit of Buddhist influence. As time goes on, and we see this with a bit with Taoism and Confucianism as well, that even when there might be conflicts with those religions earlier on, sometimes over time they end up borrowing from each other anyway, just like we see through culture in general. That can happen with religion too, and they take on qualities from each other, and so then that kind of eases some of the tensions between them. There's a map actually in your packet where it describes, it says like the Islamic world, the Christian world, and the Buddhist world. Or if it's not in the packet, I think it was in the video. And it's really kind of, it's a good simplification, but it's an oversimplification, because the world. Did I lose everybody? What happened? I don't know. I'll keep talking, but let me know if there's a connection issue. The world really isn't that simple. Not everybody in the quote unquote Christian world is Christian. Not everybody in the Islamic world is Muslim. And certainly not everybody in the Buddhist world, as it was described, as Buddhist. It was an important religion. It was an influential religion, but it certainly wasn't the only religion in any of those places. So you always have minority religious populations. Are we still connected, guys? Are we okay? Somebody give me a holler or a hand raise or a wave or something. Uh-oh. Oh, wait, something. I got a slash. I guess is that a okay sign? I don't know. I see 5 people. Suddenly, like 3 people dropped off at the same time, and I got a thing saying had a connective issue. So I want to make sure we're all doing okay here. Maybe I'll jump back on Instagram as well. Yes, we are fine. Wonderful. Okay. More questions. At least there is not a connection issue for me. I'm happy to hear that. So any other questions? Don't know what that's about. What are you doing, man? Oh, okay. Just have water at the cafe today. Nothing special today. I should have got some chai. But what can you do? You forget. That's the code for your session, Mr. Caused. Casey. Okay. Instagram is not doing good with the connection, but oh, good evening, madam. So formal. I appreciate that. We need more, some of that, a little bit more, that classy. We got to be able to switch between different levels of formality quickly. So guys, we're doing, for those who are just jumping in on Instagram, I'm also on Zoom right now. And if you want to join on there, you can go to mrcaseyhistory.com/AP World Review and jump in on Zoom so you can ask questions. We are doing some questions about period 3 from AP World. So even if you guys are ninth graders, you can benefit from this because we are currently studying, we're just finishing up period 3 right now, talking about the Mongols in our ninth grade classes. So come on, sophomores, hit me up with questions. You got questions about the Mongols? I love to talk about the Mongols. We do some pew, pew, pew. We can talk about Indian Ocean Trade Network, Swahili states, Islamic Golden Age, the rise of Islam, the caliphates. We talked about Tang and Song Dynasty already. We got like 20 more minutes. I might go a little bit over because we started a little bit late. Somebody asked about the Red Turban Army, I think, or Red Turban Rebellion. I'm not an expert about the Red Turban Rebellion. It was the rebellion that contributed to the end of the Yuan dynasty in China, the Mongol China. And the next dynasty after that would be the Ming. There's definitely a religious element to it. You had a lot of different religions. Apparently, it was started by followers of a group. I was looking it up right now. The White Lotus Rebellion. Sorry, not the White Lotus Rebellion. My mistake. But the followers of a White Lotus. But you have a lot of different religion groups. Really across the board, groups that were either both central Chinese religions like Confucianism and Taoism and Buddhism, but also religions that came from further west, like Manichaeism and Zoroastrianism. Really a lot going on. They're called the Red Turban Rebellion because they wear red turbans. I think we can probably surmise that. Not to be confused with the Yellow Turban Rebellion. The Yellow Turban Rebellion is, so it's good to know there's two colored turban rebellions, I guess. Howdy. Cool, that's a good name. The Yellow Turban Rebellion plays an important role in the decline of the Han Dynasty in the second and period 2. They didn't end the Han Dynasty. A lot of times the rebellions don't actually end the dynasty, even with invasions, but they really weaken it. And so it becomes politically unstable. And very often a lot of these empires in period 2 collapse from within. And that's something that happens very often elsewhere as well. These other things, people trying to invade or people trying to rebel tend to, no, I'm good, thank you. They want to, try to overthrow the government. I mean, we talked about this year in 10th grade. Very often revolutions they do lead to the collapse of government, but they very rarely lead to the people who led the revolution becoming the new leaders. So in this case, though, with the Red Turban Rebellion, you have the person who was part of that rebellion becoming the new emperor of the Ming Dynasty. And the Ming Dynasty is, the thing you probably think of most is Zheng He, his travels, right? These Chinese junks, these huge ships during the Ming Dynasty. But the Ming Dynasty really was for China, like trying to make a comeback after the Mongol conquest of China. There was a lot of positive things that the Mongols brought to China, but obviously for people, I mean, any people, would want to rule themselves rather than be ruled by an outside force. So the Ming Dynasty is like, kind of intended to be like almost like a Chinese Renaissance. Like we're bringing it back. It's, we're ruled by ourselves now, self-rule. So the not Silk Road, excuse me, the Great Wall of China that is so famous, we usually associate it with the Qin Dynasty. I think I mentioned this either in the Q&A Cafe or the review session recently, but it's actually the Ming Dynasty that builds the Great Wall that's so famous today, this stone structure that's really, really nice. And it's kind of funny because we think of I think many people think of that wall as being the thing that keeps out nomadic invaders from the north, yet it's built after the Mongol conquests, right? So it's a little bit of too little too late. And it's more of like a symbolic thing to say, I mean, obviously it has defensive purposes for sure, but it's a reactive thing. Like, you conquered us, but we're going to build this wall, and you will know that, like, we're showing you, like, you're not going to conquer us again. We are strong. We are strong China. And that was part of Zheng He's mission. One of the reasons for these trade missions that Zheng He went on with these enormous ships, I mean, just tremendous ships. I'm sure you guys remember from last year, the pictures we compared Zheng He's ships to the ships that Columbus had. I can even pull up a picture for you. But perhaps I'll do it on there. But really, they are doing these trade missions, not just to trade, but also because they want to show off and tell the world, we're tough, we're strong, we're China. We're not, well, I mean, that's a ship, but that doesn't really show you that we're China and we're not going to be pushed around. Yeah, we got conquered, but that was then, this is now, we're back. We're, don't mess with us. Yeah, this is okay. It's not as crazy, but you can still see what an enormous ship this was. Some of the writings, I think, where they describe the size of the ships are somewhat contested. That people say, it's an exaggeration of the size of the ships. But here, take a look at this. This is like Columbus's ship. I don't know what this looks like to you guys right now. Hopefully you can see it clearly. But the smaller ship is what Columbus's ship would look like. If you guys on Instagram actually want to see what we're talking about, jump on the Zoom, go to mrkeyshistory.com/AP World Review. You guys can see what I'm talking about. So that larger ship, that's the Chinese junks. That's what Zheng He would have been sailing in. And a fleet of those, not one ship, but multiple ships. So when they go around on these trade missions, they're seeking tribute as well. And they're trying to tell everybody, like, don't mess with China. The great irony of this is that they end, and we're planning to talk about this next week in 9th grade classes. So for those of you guys, you're getting a little bit of a preview. The crazy thing is they end this, right? They close down, they stop doing this sailing and these missions during the 1400s, early 1400s. By the end of the 1400s, or more so the beginning of the 1500s, Europeans have started entering and this is going into period 4, but Europeans have started entering the Indian Ocean from the routes that go around Africa that Da Gama figured out. Let me come end this, stop sharing. Okay. That Da Gama had discovered around Africa, and they're able to really dominate the entire Indian Ocean trade because they have superior weapons. They have, primarily gunpowder weapons, right? Guns and muskets and things like that. But who knows, had the Chinese government not ended these trade missions, had those giant, intimidating, scary ships, been floating around the Indian Ocean trade world, when the Europeans showed up, they might have just turned around, right? Because that would have, I mean, the might of China at that time, you know, who knows? You know, it's historical theorizing, but it is a great irony of that. And perhaps, you know, some have suggested they may have been able to go further if they were so inclined to maybe discover America. But that's not the way it all went down. And that has been the turning point of our history. But that's period 4. You know, it's going into period 4. So Zheng He is right at the end of period 3, right before the Ottomans conquer Constantinople, and Columbus sails the ocean blue, and that kind of takes us from period 3 to period 4, which we'll talk about next week when you guys do that for homework over the next weekend. Hit me with more questions, guys. I'm still, you know, I'm going deep onto this stuff because I want to get more questions from you guys. The last thing was, let's see if we have any more questions. Nope. Come on, y'all. I know I see somebody else just joined, I think. All right, enjoy your alligators. Take care. Anything else, guys? Anything about Ibn Battuta, Marco Polo? I know in the video they referenced the idea of like how these travel. I think it's an important concept to think about, like how travelers like Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo, because Zheng He is kind of, he's an important traveler, but he's kind of in a different class because he wasn't a traveler for travel's sake. He was worked for I suppose the other guys, Marco Polo worked for the Chinese government as well. But he was on these kind of tribute missions on behalf of the government. But for people like Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta, and they also mentioned another traveler who we didn't speak too much about, but Xuanzang, I believe is how you pronounce it, or something along those lines, probably depending on dialect, who was a Buddhist monk, and he traveled to India, and he didn't go quite as far as some of these other people. But, you know, when it comes to looking at people traveling, you know, from one place to another, and I don't know, and you look at people traveling from one place to another and then trying to describe what life is like there, what people do, they're going to be coming with their own set of biases. So one positive thing of an outside perspective, right? Somebody like Ibn Battuta describing Mali, it's really cool because he doesn't have a pro-Mali bias to start telling us how wonderful everything is, how perfect everything is. He's going to be critical. He's going to describe it how he sees it. But the downside of getting that outside perspective is they're an outsider. They're not from there. They're having a brief stay, and they're going to make a bunch of quick judgments about what that place is like. Now, you know, maybe they're going to try to be very neutral, but everybody has their biases. There's no such thing as unbiased opinion or perspective. And we're very critical in more modern times when you have Europeans going into Eastern places, when you're going to the Middle East, going to India, and then trying to come back and describe that as if they're suddenly experts. And we call that Orientalism, right? We consider that, kind of an arrogance of the colonizer to start telling us, oh, this is what it means to be in, this is what life is like in Egypt when you've spent 2 weeks there. But that's kind of what we're taking when we look at Ibn Battuta, when we look at Marco Polo and things like that. So it's not to say that we should throw out their writings or we shouldn't, read them, but we need to be conscious of that. We need to take it with a grain of salt and say, okay, just like any historical source, the person who is giving me this information is going to color it by their own perspective, their own experiences, right? What is the Delhi Sultanate? All right, I'm going to answer that. But while I'm answering that question, guys, hit me up with another question so we can get one more or two after this. So Delhi Sultanate, if you want to put it on a timeline in your mind, you can put it between, so after the Delhi Sultanate, you have the Mughal dynasty, right? The Mughals are one of the biggest, most important Indian dynasties in history. But before them, you have the Delhi Sultanate. So if we think about Indian history, right, if we start all the way back in period 1, Indus River Valley civilization, right, that collapses, and we have the Aryan migration into India. Then that starts forming certain states. We have a few small states. The biggest thing we see coming out of that is by period 2, after Alexander the Great, you have the Mauryan Empire, right? The Mauryan Empire is the big famous one, conquered almost all of India. The famous leader was Ashoka, religiously tolerant, converted to Buddhism. After him, that declines. You have a few different important states. You have the Indo-Greek kingdom. You have the Indo-Scythians. The Kushans are very important in Central Asia for helping with the spread of Buddhism and connecting with the Silk Road. And then you have the Gupta Empire, right? And that's like later on in period 2, going towards period 3, like 500s or so. But India tends to be very broken apart. If you watch the secondary videos, he makes a really, he's repetitive about that point, that India likes to be separated into separate cultures because India is very large. It's a huge place, and there's a lot of different cultures. So very rarely is India united as one place. Now, after the Gupta Empire, you have another factor that's going to be introduced here because you have Islam. I promise I'm getting to Delhi Sultanate. You have Islam arriving in India, right? So Islam starts out in the 600s, right? Starts to spread from Arabia throughout the Middle East. It goes through Persia, makes its way. So there's 2 ways that Islam gets to India. One of them is over sea, and one of them is over land. It actually gets to India over sea first through traders, or primarily. The majority of Islamic influence is coming in from traders, and a lot of them are coming to southern parts of India, right? So they're going along the Indian Ocean trade route. However, over time, you do have expansions, right? Territorial expansions and conquests from Muslim states into what's today like Pakistan and Afghanistan. So that area in the northwest of the Indian subcontinent of South Asia. And so that's like the 800s, the Umayyad Caliphate conquered all the way to the Indus River in Pakistan, what's today Pakistan. But they don't get much further than that. It's not until like the 1200s, I think around the 1000s, you start to see the beginnings of conquest, but around the 1200s, you see, major conquests into northern India. And that's where we start getting the Delhi Sultanates. And it's Sultanates with an S because there are multiple sultanates. I think I can probably pull up a map for you guys if I have it nicely on my computer. So this is like some of the early, yes, this is exactly the one I was picturing. So I can share this with you guys. I don't know what it's going to look like because it's very thin. I don't know how it's going to look to you. So hopefully it doesn't look super weird. But these are the Delhi Sultanates. And those of you who are on Instagram, it's like 2 of you now. But you guys can join on mrcaseyhistory.com/AP World Review and see what I'm talking about. I'm actually going to get off Instagram now, because we're getting to the end of this. But take care, guys. And if you want to see the rest of this, you have to come on Zoom. Peace out. So all right. So the Delhi Sultanates, we have a few different Delhi Sultanates, right? So like I said, 1200s, you start to have these dynasties. And you can see on the map, they're not, first of all, they're not all of India. The Tughlaq dynasty had the best case, but even these are just snapshots in the middle of their reign. They're called the Delhi Sultanates because they tend to be based in Delhi, which is, if you kind of look at where all of the sultanates overlap, in the north of India, a little bit to the west, but not too much. That's where Delhi is. And that was their capital. So these are, the rulers are generally either people of Afghan-ish or Turkic descent, so essentially Central Asian Muslim leaders who are conquering in the north of India, ruling for a while, and then getting replaced by other people of a similar background who invade again and take them over. So you have a really interesting period in Indian history here with the Delhi Sultanate, from, like it says on the map, from 1206 to 1526, where Islam is really kind of, or I should say Muslim states or Muslim rulers are dominant in the north. And so one big kind of like cultural development is the south really kind of like becomes, and even within the north, but within the south, they really like become passionately Hindu, right? We often see this is a really good example of how the introduction of something different allows the people to be more conscious of their own unity and their own like self-definition. So people in India didn't necessarily think of themselves as Hindu, as in other words, that everyone in India is the same, right? India's vastly diverse with different languages, different religious beliefs. Even now today we call it all Hinduism, but Hinduism is so many things. There's so much to Hinduism, so many different interpretations and ways of practicing it, as is common with polytheism. So this introduction of not just Islam as a religion, but particularly that the North has been conquered by Muslim rulers, you start to see yourselves like, we're not like that. Our religion is different. Even though we all have different religions, we're all more similar to each other than we are to this other group that's coming in. They're ethnically different. They're linguistically different. They're Afghan and Turkic speakers, especially towards the end, more and more Turkic. And so you see empires in the South starting to rise up and trying to fight back against them and just kind of define themselves more clearly. Another development is like language. The modern languages of North India, primarily though Hindi and Urdu, which are basically the same language, I think you would describe it as two different standardizations of one language. So in common speech, they're the same language, Hindi and Urdu. And that word, the term Urdu is really from the horde, right? So we think of like the Mongol hordes, the Golden Horde, or really actually means the army camps. And it was the language spoken there. So it's a language that's based on the Indian languages that goes all the way back to Sanskrit, I should say. But now it's not just Indian languages, but it's getting influence from Turkic languages because the people are invading are Turkic or Afghans. It's getting an influence from Persian because Persian was the literary language of the time. It's getting influence from Arabic because of the religious use of Arabic. And so all that is kind of blending in together to create this Hindustani language, or Hindi or Urdu, and other languages in that region in the North are going to be influenced by those outside influences as well. But the big kind of turning point here is at the end of, did I lose you guys? Where are you? Oh, stop share. There we go. At the end of the Delhi Sultanate, you have the Mughal Empire, and the Mughal Empire is the one that finally, like the Delhi Sultan, compared to the Delhi Sultanate, the Mughal Empire is like on their game, right? The Delhi Sultanate, they're four different, sultanates. They're not totally getting it together, conquering India. The Mughals come in and they like get it done. From their perspective, obviously. And what's the technology that the Mughals have, though, that makes this possible? They have a new technology. It's very important. And we're not going to go into the Mughals right now because that's period 4, but just understanding the role that the Delhi Sultanate plays kind of leading up to the Mughal Empire. What's the technology? The Mughals have it. The Ottomans have it. The Safavids have it. Europeans are about to get their hands on it. Caused a lot of trouble. Makes for good fireworks. That's the one. Yo, I'm not going to say your name. I'm not trying to put you on blast, but yo, this guy is like crushing it today. We're getting all these answers, like responding so quick, man. Come on, the rest of you guys need to say something. I want you guys to share. I want you guys to give your voice. So yes, that is correct. Gunpowder. And that's going to make a big difference in that conquest and being able to conquer more. I think we have time for one more question. If you guys can hit me up with something. Try to look at what we didn't cover. Just remember, guys, as I'm waiting for a question, we will have, we're planning to have review sessions after school this Wednesday and Friday. We had review sessions last Wednesday and Friday. Wednesday, we did all of period 1. Friday, we did most of period 2. We kind of did period 2.1 and 2.2. And so I plan on Wednesday to do period 2.3 and then try to do most of 3, and we'll see how far we can get. I hope that we can get through to 4 by Friday, and I think we can at least start on period 4 on Friday. Although unfortunately for the video recording, Wednesday is good, it's all uploaded. Friday, the video actually got cut off in the middle of our discussion, we were talking about Christianity and Paul and Jewish law and circumcision and all this stuff, and then video cut off. So we only have that much uploaded, but like I said, at the end of the video, I put a little note to remind you guys that you can still watch the secondary videos, and they're really good. So I really want to urge you guys to start doing that. If you didn't do it already this weekend, maybe you can do it tonight. And don't forget, guys, tomorrow we're going to be doing Kahoot, and I am counting it as a quiz. I really wanted to put the pressure on you guys so we can get this content really known really well. Oh, there's something Q&A. I didn't even see that. Yikes. Am I wearing Tibetan letters on my shirt? No, that's actually that's actually a really good question. This is actually Elvish. I was wondering if anyone was going to ask me about that. Yeah, it's Elvish. It's this is actually the Black Speech, but it's written in the Tengwar script of the elves, and it is the inscription on the inside of the One Ring. I would love to do an entire Zoom call just about that, but I don't think that that's super important to you guys right now. If you're ever interested, I'm happy to talk to you about it during my office hours. There's a couple of questions on here that I just saw, so I'm sorry guys if I didn't see them before. So I'll try to answer them real quick before we go. Can you talk about the Grand Canal and its impact? I did talk about that a little bit before. It might have been before you jumped on. The Grand Canal was made by the Sui dynasty, short-lived Chinese dynasty right before the Tang, right at the end of the period of disunion. The big thing that it does is it connects north and south of China. So China started out in the north along the Yellow River, right? We talked about from period one, the Shang dynasty, Xia dynasty, Zhou dynasty later. They're not, all of what is China today was not China historically. Those places were conquered and eventually, kind of brought into Chinese culture. So southern China and northern China are not like culturally identical, but by having the Grand Canal, you're doing trade, you're doing economic, the same way we talk about having road systems and the importance of them, it's also important to be able to have this kind of a system over water, but it's going to allow for more of that cultural consolidation. We talked last year about the different methods of consolidation of an empire. And one of them is, ideally you can do it without being coercive, without using force and like violence, but it can be useful for a government to have everybody at least have some extent of shared culture. Language is most powerful factor in that. And having the Grand Canal not only enabled trade and everything like that, but it connected people in a way that they started to see themselves as one people, like a Chinese people, right? And that expansion and further definition of a Han Chinese identity as an ethnic group, plays a big role in like making China China. Can you talk about the Aztecs and the impact of the tribute system? Yeah, I think I have time to talk about that a little bit. If you have something specific about like what about the tribute system you didn't understand, let me know real quick and I can try to fine tune what you're asking. But you had a situation where, so like, I think it's good to compare the Aztecs with the Inca. The Inca had something called the Mita system, where people who lived under their empire were required to do a certain amount of labor for the state. It's a form of corvée labor, which I think we talked about last week, I think we talked about it in the review session, although that might have been part that got cut off. So labor basically as a tax. Instead of paying in money, you pay in working for the state. The Aztecs had more of a tribute system. So tribute means, and I think we also talked about this the other day, is payment where it's sort of like taxes, but less formalized. And the Aztecs had kind of united with a couple other groups that kind of worked together, but then they kind of dominated that and required tributes from people. There was even taking of people for human sacrifices, for religious purposes. And their tribute system, while it has its benefits in bringing wealth to the state, also caused some of their people not to be too thrilled with them. people who were under Aztec rule. It is an empire, right? So not everybody under Aztec rule is an Aztec, like ethnically, culturally. They ruled over a lot of Mexico and parts of Central America. And so when the Europeans came in period 4, which we'll talk about next week, the Aztecs had some internal enemies. The Europeans were able to, the Spanish were able to ally with some of the people living under Aztec rule who really did not like being under Aztec rule and say, hey, why don't you help us kick these guys out? And of course, that didn't work out too well for those people who helped the Spanish. If you tell me something specific about the tribute system, like maybe I can clarify it further. Accounts, patent letters. All right. If not, I think that is the end for today. If there's anything that I didn't answer as clearly as you wanted, from what you were asking, if I kind of went in a different direction, please let me know. Feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to, give further information or point you towards some resources to help you with that. Again, I really, really, really urge you guys or encourage you guys to watch those secondary videos. They're amazing. Especially because they have the timestamps on them. You can just click and just see like 2 minutes, like something that you want to get clarification on. And, you also have your textbook. If there's something that you really, really want to know more about, for whatever reason, your textbook is really 9th grade heavy. The 10th grade stuff, it tends to skim certain things that I go like, what? How could you just brush over that? That's so important. But the 9th grade stuff, sometimes I read it and I go, why are they going into all this detail? Like this is not, we don't need this. So any like 9th grade stuff that you're struggling with, or you want to just kind of get a little bit more information on, the textbook is actually a pretty good resource for that. It's not great for assigning homework and having you guys read it because it's like really burdensome. But for references like this, where you just need to find out a little bit more about a particular piece of information, it actually does a decent job at that. But if there's anything you can't find, let me know. We'll find it together. I think that's it for today, guys. Thank you to the 4 people who are still on. Hey, man. Thank you. Appreciate you guys being here. I hope that you guys can hype it up. Maybe if we can get maybe by next week, if we can get a large group of people, if we can get like 40 people to come on, maybe Casey can make a cameo. I know some people were asking for that. You bring me those numbers, and we'll see if the star can find it in her schedule to come in. So, all right, guys, have a good evening. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And that's it. Namarie.